Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roan Hunter. Let's jump right in. Well, Roan, here we are starting the podcast about sex, God, and chaos.
Yeah, looking forward to see where we go with this
What
thing.
a title. What a title. Who knows what you know about any of these topics, but we'll give it a shot, right?
That's right.
So I think, if I'm just tuning into this podcast, the title enough it's intriguing on its own. But I'd love to know, you have a very chaotic story. And if somebody's going to start talking to me about my chaos, I want to know that they have the ability to address that firsthand. So if you would just share with us a little bit about kind of your backstory. I know a phrase you use is being raised by wolves and getting into that. I mean, it's such a fascinating, your upbringing is a little bit insane.
It is, and it was chaos. The title of our podcast ties in with our book that Eve and I wrote, Sex, God, and the Chaos of Betrayal. And it's basically the process of healing and recovery from sexual addiction, pornography, infidelity, and anything along those lines in relationship where there's some form of betrayal. And for me, the way that it started for me, my parents divorced when I was 8 years old. I grew up out in the middle of nowhere in Mississippi.
That's everywhere in Mississippi.
That's
right?
That's all it is, right? Yeah, small towns and nothing. Mm-hmm. I had two older brothers that were 4 and 5 years older. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old, and we basically were kind of turned out at that point. I really began running with them when I was 10 years old. And so by that time, they're 14 and 15 years old, and my oldest brother, we had wheels. And so I ran with them and their buddies that were the same age. And that's why I always say I was raised by wolves, because I ran with the wolf pack. And there was some good in that. They certainly were my protectors, but they were also my terrorists. The runt of the litter,
right?
Yeah, kind of gets the brunt of all the good stuff. And so that was just kind of growing up. Very little parental involvement, supervision, curfew, boundaries, structure, and you just kind of learn to figure it out. And I did. My mother's attitude was boys will be boys. We had porn on the bedside table because that was what boys do. And then, of course, drinking, that's all you do in small town Mississippi. You ride the roads and drink beer and, shoot something, maybe a deer, whatever. And so drinking started at like 12 years old. The porn thing was already there. And then at 15, started dating my future wife, Eva. And, of course, the way this thing works, it begins to escalate. And so it's, masturbation, porn, and then sex with girls. And Eva and I, our relationship was pretty chaotic. Obviously, I had no structure and no rules, and she grew up in a good conservative Baptist home, and it was all rules for her. So she meets me, and I think that's why she was attracted to me. That could be the only reason.
Definitely wasn't your appearance.
Yeah, because she could come to my house and get a beer out of the refrigerator because we had no rules, and all she had was lots of rules, and relationship was not that important, which is typical in growing up in a rigid kind of religious system. And then we date through high school, and it's just we would break up and get back together. And, the porn thing for me was kind of always, it was there. And then we decided in going into our freshman year at college, we decided that, our freshman year, that summer before, we had an abortion. And that was really the the big T traumas in my life. The first one was parents divorcing at 8 years old. And then the abortion was the second big T trauma. And Eva suffered from full-blown PTSD, which is pretty common somewhere in the neighborhood in the 80 percentile. Women that have abortions suffer with full-blown PTSD. And, of course, in our sexually broken world, nobody talks about that. And so she's just pinging. It was kind of more chaotic. And I'm like a deer in the headlights at this point. We don't know anything. We're, 18, 19 years old,
right,
and just pretty clueless about all this stuff. And so going into our senior year at State, we decided to fix it all and let's get married. That'll fix it, right?
The ultimate solution.
Oh, yeah, because that's going to take care of my porn problem, of course, because then you get married, you have all the sex you want, and you don't need that.
You sound a little sarcastic. Is
I don't know. I sat with thousands of guys over the years, and we all think that, but, that's not reality.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you're living this.
Living it out. Oh, yeah. And, what happens, one of the drivers with this sexual addiction, porn addiction, all of it, one of the drivers is medicating our anxiety. We don't know that, but, boy, do we ever love and figure it out. Because it actually works as it works. And that's why we will get hooked on it and it will become compulsive. And mine certainly was. And then if anxiety is the driver, when you get married, there's no stress, right? It's stress-free living after you get married.
No one tells you this. It's an anxiety multiplier.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for both parties.
It's like with porn, I always talk about, it's like the alcoholic that it medicates his depression with alcohol, which is a depressant.
Right.
Yeah, and, for porn addicts or porn users, we are medicating our anxiety with an anxiety-producing type of behavior because of all the excitement chemicals, the dopamine, everything that's going on in the brain. The anxiety is cranking, and then of course orgasm it soothes that anxiety. So we're actually kind of creating the need for the fix, but nobody understands that until you actually begin to get into your growth mode and begin to change it.
Well, and we should say at this point, you guys are pacing through this long before this is a part of the common vernacular. I mean, you're basically out there trying to figure it out by yourself. Oh,
yeah. Well, I came to Jesus when I was a sophomore at State. And I always say that was, I was serious because as a 20-year-old frat boy, I gave up drinking, cussing, and smoking. Now that's some serious Jesus stuff right there.
So what'd you do with all your time? I don't understand.
Yeah, I had to figure something out. Right. Well, what we started doing was going to church, right? Because that's going to fix it. And man, we did from day one. Involved in churches along the way, and I'm 60 years old and still involved in church. Although I do believe the church system is completely broken, and I believe you have to be involved to engage it and try to change it, which is sometimes like beating your head against the wall trying to change that system. And so we wound up getting married, and then my sexual addiction, and again, as you said, none of these terms, Dr. Patrick Carnes, who we've done our CSAT training under, we'll talk about that a little bit later, he coined that term in the kind of the mid-'80s in his first book that he wrote, Out of the Shadows. And so this was 1990. Eve and I are living in Atlanta. My sexual addiction had escalated. I'd tried several geographic cures, graduated from college, lived in the Mobile, Alabama area, and the acting out began to escalate, which is the typical progression, is the escalation behaviors. And so I was going to strip joints and massage parlors and then ultimately prostitutes. Now, this was all hidden and all secret because I was I wanted to be a very good Christian and churchgoer. And, I would sit in church and I'd never heard anybody talk about their lust problem, or they used to have a lust problem, or they thought about a lust problem. Nobody.
Nowhere.
No, nothing. And it's
not even your pastor?
Oh, weird, right? Yeah. And so, I'm sitting in there in church and not hearing anything, and I'm just dying on the inside because I'm thinking I must be the only guy. Like when they walk down that aisle and take them behind that curtain, I think there must be some kind of castration or something because nobody else was dealing with this except for me. And I'm literally dying because ultimately this thing is a soul issue. It affects, we call it multifaceted. It affects every aspect of our soul. And that's why even Paul writes in 1 Corinthians in chapter 6 where he talks about sexuality and sexual sin, it is deeper, right? Because of the affect that it has on every part of who we are, the God stamp on our life. And, that sermon gets preached like if you're a sexual sinner, you're the worst of the worst, and you're definitely going to hell, and there's really no hope for you. That's the way it gets preached, but that's not what Paul is saying at all. It's more about the depth of how this affects us. And so I'm sitting out there and just dying. And Eve and I are, at this point, we had moved from Mobile to Nashville. We lived in Nashville for about a year, and then I got transferred. I was in corporate sales world. And I wound up in Atlanta. And so I'm 27 years old. Eve and I are standing just in our kitchen. We weren't fighting. We weren't arguing. At this time, we had our two sons. They were almost 2 and almost 4. And Eve was asking me, why are you so down? What's going on? And God moved because the words came out of my mouth, honey, I have a problem with pornography. Now, I know that was God because if it had been me, I would have said, honey, I have a problem with geography. I can't read a map, and it's just so depressing, right? Because there was no way in hell I was ever going to tell her. I was trying to figure this thing out on my own, and certainly I was not going to tell my wife. And so those words came out of my mouth, and that was really the beginning of my journey when God moved in that way. Because I literally remember looking behind me going, who said that? Because just based on that, she loaded up our two sons. And she flipped out, loaded up our two sons and came back home to Mississippi to mama. And I'm standing there going, oh crap, because there was a whole lot more. And so that began my journey of seeking Christian counseling and then getting into recovery. And, that was one good thing about living in Atlanta. This was 1990, and as you mentioned earlier, there was very little out there around sexual addiction, certainly porn addiction. The internet had not come along. Porn addiction was real, but we had these things called magazines. It's like
say more.
I know you young guys don't know what that is. It's like it's just paper and there's ink and pictures.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
And so very little out there. And but living in Atlanta, I got connected with. It was actually Dr. Doug Rosenau. He is one of the pioneers in Christian sex therapy, not sexual addiction. But at that point, Doug was probably one of the best people to go to in the country, just because of his knowledge around healthy sexuality. And certainly he had seen the compulsive nature of porn and acting out sexually. And so I engaged with Doug, and then right about that time, it was one of the first, way before Celebrate Recovery or anything. It was one of the first Christ-centered recovery and support group ministries in the country. Bill Morris was an LPC, and he started this ministry, and it was a game changer for me because that's where I got plugged in and began to understand the power of connection. Because to me, that is the critical aspect in recovery for any of us, because connection is the cure. And man, that was just a God thing that I was there, got connected with Bill on the very front end, and became I don't know, our term that we used was trusted servants, which I like a whole lot better than leader in Christian world, because leader is a dangerous term. And so that ministry began, and I was on the front end, and it's where I learned how to do groups. I learned the importance of connection, and Bill actually wrote a book called The Complete Handbook for Recovery and Support Group Ministry in the Church. It was like a real book. Thomas Nelson published it, and those of us that were there in the beginning got to write a little piece, just kind of our story. So I've been a published author for many, many years.
As you're quick to tell people.
Of course.
Yeah, so taking just a pause right here in the story, I think the thing that this is making me understand at a new level is that you've lived all of this and have kind of had to make your way, you and Eva both, through what recovery looks like, and wanting to use faith in the church and that system to help you along. It disappoints you in a lot of ways, in ways that it shouldn't have. It should have had an answer, but it didn't have an answer. So this sets you guys off charting your own course with the help of some trusted advisors that move in, that thank God he was up to something during this time, predominantly outside of the church. But fast forwarding, you guys just commit to this journey of health. It goes perfectly, and within 6 months, everything's better.
Yeah, we're all good.
No, right. So it takes a very long time for you guys to navigate this. But we should say you guys are in a place of health in your marriage, and you're actually poised and have been for decades now helping other couples not go through that experience that you went through. Because in a lot of ways we have a different scenario, but it's the same result. There's so much information out there that is not great information that's based in a lot of the ways that our society is confused about sex and God in general.
Totally. So Eva winds up, she comes back, and then it was like 2 years of living hell. She was locked in, wanted a divorce, and she was not willing. We would go to counseling, and Doug would, of course, I'm the problem, and he's working with me, and then he would kind of shine the spotlight over there on Eva, and she would say, "I'm fine. He's the problem. He's why we're here. Fix him." Because he would want to talk about, growing up and her dad being an alcoholic and how that affected her. And then he would talk about the abortion, and she was like, "I'm over that." Excuse me. "I'm over that. He's the problem. Fix him." And always joke, now that I sit on the other side of the couch in the chair, we call that in counseling world long-term revenue, because ain't much going to happen there, right?
That's a repeat customer.
Yeah, there's no such thing as marriage counseling, by the way. It's two individuals that are willing to do their own work. And at that point, she was not. And so I finally just relented after 2 years of living that way, because she's dealing now with complex trauma based on the grown-up alcoholic father, the abortion, PTSD, and now it's complex because she was dealing with full-blown betrayal trauma. And again, this was 92, there was nothing out there. Betrayal trauma really didn't come around until probably the late 90s, 2000 is when that began to be a thing. But nobody dealt with what we call the partner of sexual addiction. And they suffer from betrayal trauma, which absolutely is very real. So we divorced, and during that time is when Eva had her grace awakening, as we call it. She went to an adult children of alcoholics meeting at the urging of her mother, and her mother had gotten into Al-Anon, and so they gave her the laundry list of the characteristics of an adult child of an alcoholic, and for some reason, light bulb goes off. And she goes down that list, and she had every one of them. And she began to understand her contribution to the dynamics of the relationship. We always say there's 4 C's with this type of recovery around betrayal. Number 1, the partner did not cause it. They cannot change it. They cannot control it. And then the fourth C is what's the contribution to the dynamics of the relationship? Because that's the intimacy disorder that we call it. And so Eva began to look at her contribution in the dynamics and the things that she was doing that contributed to just what we call the intimacy disorder. And so we started talking and we reconciled eventually and remarried. We were part, I call it our marriage sabbatical. We were separated and divorced a little over, right about a year. And then we reconciled, and our commitment was that we were going to do our work. And we got both engaged. Eva had her counselor. I was seeing Doug. We would see Doug and her counselor together. We always laugh when we do these men's coaching weekends, and a guy will say something like, "Man, I tried that counseling thing, and I went like 2 times, and it just didn't do any good." And I'm like, "Yeah, we went 2 times a week for probably 2 years, plus our individual work, and we're both involved in groups, and then we backed off. We went once a week for another couple of years. But I tried it 2 times.
Huge misconceptions around
it
work,
is, because with all this stuff, you're dealing with fundamental, even spiritual formation and belief system. I mean, this stuff goes to the roots of even who we are. And just to think that you're going to go sit with a counselor and 2 or 3 times and just going to change everything, it just doesn't work that way.
I totally resonate with what those guys say, though, because you've had to say to me in certain contexts, like, "Man, you've spent 38 years believing this. You're not going to break this in 2 hours.
Yeah,
this is going to take some time."
Yeah.
And a lot of that is so you can afford yourself some grace to say, because most of that is shame and embarrassment.
Totally.
Like, I should have this figured out. It's been 2 hours. You're like, that's not how this works. This is going to take a minute. So you guys double down, you commit to your work, and things start changing. And you get called into this or led into this helper profession.
Absolutely.
Which is awesome and has gone well and has resulted in so many great things. And here we are talking about a book that you guys have released where you're really addressing, and this, I love this conversation because it's explaining why this title and why your approach in this book is so bold and so direct.
Yeah, because we've lived it. This stuff that we're talking about, we didn't just, go to counseling school and read it in a book.
The magic counseling school.
Yeah, that's gonna really help. We always say it's like, the first question you need to ask a counselor if you're going to go to counseling, first question you need to ask is, tell me about the work that you've done. Because if they've not done their work, they are probably not going to be helpful and may even be more destructive than what you're already dealing with. And that's not an indictment on the profession, but maybe it could be, because it's so important. I was already involved in that ministry, the support group recovery ministry, and I wound up, and especially in groups dealing with sex addiction, the turnover rate in those groups is I call it fruit basket turnover, because if you don't go to group for about 6 months, you'll walk in and go, "Man, it's a whole new group of guys."
Where are the old guys?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I just by default became the leader, trusted servant, leading that we called it Sex Addicts Victorious. Now, you got to want recovery to go into a group that
Sex
Addicts Victorious.
So what do you do here?
Yeah, that's right. What's this about? It's choir practice. And so I always say, my qualifications to lead that group, or even the groups I do today, I tell them, my qualifications are that I am able to keep up with the key to the door. I don't lose the key, so I'm qualified. That's right. And I can do it over a long period of time. And so we were already engaged in that, and Eva was in the Codependence Victorious at the time, and then we just, we're involved in church, and we began meeting with couples. I'm meeting with men, she's meeting with women, and then we would meet with couples that are dealing with this. And we were not getting paid for it. I think that might be called ministry.
Yeah, that's
right?
called church work.
Yeah. No, you get paid for it. You get paid to do it.
Yeah.
I was not getting paid.
Oh, you were a volunteer.
Double suck.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. You get paid to be nice and meet with people. But you're not a nice guy.
No.
No. That's why I love you. And so we were already engaged in that. And then certainly in the process of just, I was so fortunate of just the mentors and the guides and the people that God brought into my life that encouraged me into truly God's calling. And then we wound up, that's why we do what we do today. Went back to school and did all the counseling stuff and it got licensed. And then we're also Eve and I both are certified sex addiction therapists. We're supervisors in that world. It's through the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals, Dr. Patrick Carnes. And so not only are we counselors, that is almost like another master's degree. And then we're also certified through the Certified Sex Addiction Specialist International or Clinical Sex Addiction Specialist International. So we've got an additional certification. And they were also clinical members of the American Board of Christian Sex Therapists, which is Dr. Doug Rosenau's organization. And so that's on the healthy sexuality side. So we're working with the dark side in the recovery from this stuff. And then we're also, the goal, of course, is healthy Christian sexuality. And that's just something that is sorely needed in church today because this sexually broken culture, we can't live in it and not be affected by it. And certainly Christians are, and just a lot of distorted thinking. And so really that's kind of our journey of kind of why we do what we do today. And then writing the book is just our process, the roadmap that we came up with, because when couples are at this level of crisis, I don't believe there's any greater crisis in a marriage than when betrayal occurs. Maybe the death of a child, of course, but there's no greater crisis in the coupleship, in the relationship, than when betrayal happens. And so we're like the Hellfighters, which is the old movie John Wayne did about the story of Red Adair and his team that go in and put out the oil well fires. They charge right into the fire and cap that oil well. And that's kind of the level of where we're working with in marriages, because it is major crisis.
I think a big part of that, I'm going to interrupt you there, because I think so many of our listeners, that's going to be a big place of freedom to understand that there's a place that people have to operate when this sort of thing goes on, because what we believe is, like you said before, I'm the only one, this doesn't happen, nobody's talking about it. It can be very orienting and calming in the beginning, at least, to know, okay, there are guides in this space that know how this goes, that understand how it feels. You and Eva are two of those people where you can sit someone down and say, all right, we can tell you how to get through this. We can guide you how to get through this. Let me just orient you to this process right now. And it does feel, and I want to get to the title here if we can, it does feel like you've got this cocktail of, we have this sexual betrayal, we've grown up around faith that hasn't really addressed this, and we're in the most chaotic part of our lives where a lot of our previous trauma, as you mentioned with Eva, and your own, is kind of rushed into this relationship. So when people read the title of the book, they may think, wow, well, that's a pretty sensational title. But really it's a descriptor, wouldn't you say, of what happens as sexual addiction begins to invade your adult life in new ways and all the relational connectivity that you have.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's basically a disordered soul. And, originally psychology was the study of the soul. I don't know what it is today. But all of those facets are affected with this stuff. And then when we're living kind of this disordered, dysfunctional existence, it's just chaos. There's depression, there's anxiety, there's fear, there's, keeping secrets. That's that's not the way that a human being was designed to function. So it's very chaotic before discovery, and then when discovery happens, when all hell breaks loose, now it is total chaos. Because, you've got two people that are completely emotionally dysregulated. Because that's one of the things in the addiction, whether it's porn, whether it's sex, whatever, we're medicating our emotions. And now when discovery happens, I use the term even discovery trauma for the addict, because it's traumatic when it gets found out. You thought you were going to take this thing to your grave, and now, poof, here it is. And so there's trauma there, and then for the partner, there's betrayal trauma. And it's just totally just two emotionally dysregulated people, and it is chaos. And, our process kind of speaks into that chaos to where we can tell a couple, if you work this process, if you trust this process, you can not only survive this, but you can have the marriage that God intended you to have. Now, it's going to take work. It's going to be painful. It's not going to be quick. All that's reality. And then a lot of the time that we spend early on is just we're working to comfort the hurt of the partner that's been betrayed. And that's a problem. We don't jump right in. We're there's a lot of just kind of, we got to put out we do the fire drills of the week, but we're really working to kind of comfort that hurt and to create a safe space, because the partner is just spinning because nothing feels safe. And we keep a focus on the coupleship. A lot of times people recommend you go to your therapist and you go to your therapist. And that's okay, but there's no focus on the coupleship. And so we're trying to get them in the room together at least maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, either on the front end of a session or the back end, to get the couple in the room together. Because if they're both coming and they're both wanting to reconcile or survive this, you've got to have a focus on the coupleship, which a lot of the way it works in a lot of cases, that's not there. And so we're keeping a focus on that. And then the work that we do, even in the process, is, again, it's individual work in a group session, because you got 4 people in the room, Eva and I, and then the couple. And we're taking them through kind of their own history. We call it collecting the dots, connecting the dots, and then we're going to correct the dots. But there's so much in that process, and the thing that's always amazing is how they may know some facts about the other person's growing up, but they've never understood the impact of it, and they certainly have not understood the track that it set them on. So we're really moving towards true intimacy of knowing and being known in this process. And that's what we call the intimacy disorder. It's a movement from that to true intimacy in the marriage that God designed or wanted for all of us.
The big part of this that I think is just so striking here in episode 1, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm like, man, this is a really complex issue. But when you're walking through it, it doesn't feel complex. It's like, stop masturbating.
Yeah.
Stop looking at porn. Stop going to the strip club. It's like, this is a pretty A to B.
Oh, yeah.
And you walk into this process, and maybe even people are taking in this episode, or they've gotten involved with the book, and like, man, even from page 1, as you guys dig into your story, it's like, whoa, there are a lot of factors here. That can be really freeing to help people hear, like, hey, yeah, obviously you want to solve the acute issue. But in order to really solve that long term, we've got to look at all the complexity, not only the things that you are bringing into the marriage, but that your partner's bringing into the marriage. And believe it or not, your caretakers or your parents are kind of in the house every day inside of your marriage. That's a new revelation for a lot of people, because we hear inside of church, no, we leave and cleave. The two became one.
Oh, yeah, it's all good.
One with the family tree. That's what you became one with, So I think people listening, I guess we're just trying to convey here as we're laying out the stage here, there is hope to move through a process that includes sexual addiction, where you've sprinkled a little God in there and it didn't work. you're still experiencing the chaos or the fallout of previous trauma. All of this language can be very important to be able to use with your partner as you're walking through it, to be able to use with your therapist as you're working through the process. So I guess I'd just love to hear your answer as we're wrapping up this episode. Is there hope for a healthy relationship with these three things? Can I have a healthy relationship with sex? Is it possible that I could enter into a relationship with a loving God? And can I, maybe the biggest question, if life is going to be chaotic, I mean, Jesus was very upfront about that. There's a lot of trouble in the world. That's my paraphrase. I have these three things that are essentially unavoidable. Can I be in healthy relationship with those three things?
Oh, I certainly I say absolutely yes, because I've lived it, and not only have I lived it, I've gotten to experience and observe and watch others begin to live that out. And it is it's not simple. It's kind of like golf. It's a simple game. It's a stick, a tee, and a ball. Right. Yeah. But if anybody's ever played golf, it's not that simple. It's complex because of all the, intricacies that are associated with this. And certainly engaging in the process, trusting the process, there's so much hope. But again, not easy. There will be trouble. And one of the things that's just interesting, like finding somebody that knows how to work with this in the helping profession is rare, because counselors in graduate work usually get maybe one course on sexuality, one semester.
That can't be true.
It's very true. And then pastors sometimes.
Wait, let me take this one.
Yeah, how much training did you get?
No courses.
0.
Yes.
Yeah.
I spent more time in a pool at a seminary campus learning how to baptize than talking about actually any relational issue.
Yeah.
It was all theological and practical of how to do the job. Mm-hmm. And I went to a great school.
Yeah.
But that was the emphasis. We have to prepare you for the expectations that are ahead of you.
Yeah.
At an organizational level. The relational level was largely ignored.
Oh, yeah. And so, and people seek out pastors more so than counselors for the, when this stuff happens, they'll go to their faith leader.
Yeah, according to stats, 150% more likely to pursue clergy than a counselor.
Yeah. And so now, at least a counselor got one semester on sexuality, and now you're going to see somebody that got nothing.
No, nothing, yeah.
Yeah, and probably is struggling with it in his own life, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the same way with counselors, and that's why this question of, tell me about your work. If they've not done work around their sexuality and sex and all that, and again, the culture is so broken, our preferred term is not even sexual addiction. The term that we work with is sexual brokenness, and the culture is just completely upside down, backwards, and broken when it comes to sex. And so you're seeking help from people that are just kind of in the same boat as you are.
Yeah, but we would say, and just to kind of seal this up here, because I'm excited about where this conversation is going to go over the life of this podcast, because there's so much to talk about, so many wires to uncross, and so many people that are desperate to get the help that you and even this book are offering. But the answer is yes, that you can get to a life that is healthy with these things. It's just going to take a little bit of work, and thankfully, and I say this just as an indicator of our friendship, you've helped me walk through a lot of this stuff that was highly concealed even from me.
Yeah.
Even in a healthy marriage, quote unquote. Yeah. Even as a pastor, even as, well, no, I don't have anything that's going to make me lose my job or go to jail that's going on in my story right now. But I'm wrecking my marriage and destroying my wife. And I had to get honest about that.
Yeah.
Because my wife got honest first. That's a story for another day. But there is healing available, and there's a process, a proven process that I think the book shows page after page after page. But even more than that, the thousands of people that have received help through LifeWorks and what you guys have put together, couples that have regain the marriage they had before, replaced the marriage they had before.
Yeah.
And so what the people are going to be able to hear and learn, what we're going to discover together, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
So let's do this. Let's take the deep dive. This is what I appreciate most about you is I can be convinced that you're just a dumb Mississippian, but you pull out a book where you're like, trust me, I've read some smart people. Right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So let's take the deep dive. Let's say that I've been intrigued enough, like, okay, this is a complex scenario. And I do have a cocktail in my life of chaos and sex and a little bit of God when I feel really ashamed and guilty. What are people saying, or what's a quote that's made an impact on you, or a resource that maybe someone could dig into as they start this journey?
Yeah, I just always, even usually when we do a talk or anything, the one thing that we say over and over is this idea. I would say, well, two things. Good mental health, good mental, emotional, spiritual health lives in reality. And that's a quote from M. Scott Peck that's been around for a while. But you've got to get to reality. You've got to get honest with yourself. You've got to get honest with those in your life. And you've got to get honest with others, which leads me to my second point. The cure for what ails us, whatever it is, the cure is connection on a deep level. Not kind of what we do at church. Hey, man, how are you? Great, good, fine, see you next Sunday. That's not deep connection.
Mm-hmm. That may be worth repeating.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Lobby to lobby, see you next Sunday. Or maybe once a month, as life picks up, the regular attendance in a church service. Because I do think that's a myth, and over the episodes, we're going to bust a lot of myths.
Amen.
But maybe that's the first one we should take head on, is that if you're trying to use the current religious, maybe we should say Western religious church system to solve these sorts of problems, you're only going to frustrate the people in the system and especially yourself.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because again, just in my story, I was in it and I tried everything that they said to do from the pulpit, right? Read your Bible more and pray harder, which I think means grunt when you pray. Maybe you could help me with that sometime. I'm not sure. I tried it. I grunted when I prayed.
It's mostly
I prayed
about
harder.
being physically expressive, even though everyone's eyes are closed.
Yeah, okay, good.
But the grunt you're referencing is the Christian.
Yeah. I got a lot of that. But all those things that you would hear about dealing with sin, I'm a reader, and I would read and try and do, and none of it worked. Yeah, until I came out into the light.
Yeah, wise point. So at this point, just driving people to another book or another quote, probably the bravest thing someone could do would be to pursue environments where you're engaging with other people honestly about where you've been or where you are. Which is a terrifying prospect.
It is.
Good luck convincing me to do that.
Oh, yeah.
But once you do it, it's almost like a drug because you feel seen maybe for the first time in your life.
Yeah, and I think that's what Jesus offers over and over, First time he ever speaks in public, he rolls out the scroll of Isaiah, and he talks about he came to set the captives free, and it is for our freedom that he came. Now, the Sunday school answer is he came to save us. Well, yeah, he did that. But he's talking about life here and now, life today, the abundant life that he offers, the way, the truth, and the life. And man, coming out into the light, getting honest with yourself, that is the way of freedom. That's how it works.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.